All right, everyone, we got to talk about some of the Republicans' reaction to Trump sparring with John Roberts. You remember John Roberts, the dude appointed by Bush who basically destroyed what was the modern Republican Party? Oh, you know the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, the one that allowed Obamacare through and said, "Oh, well, yeah, it's constitutional because it's kind of like a tax. It's being billed as healthcare reform, but it's really not. It's just a tax on people that don't have healthcare, so it's perfectly fine. Yeah, the mandate's perfectly allowed. You can be forced to pay this tax if you don't have health care. Perfectly acceptable. Certainly something the founders would have found perfectly kosher for the Constitution. The concept that people shouldn't be deprived of life, liberty, and happiness. Perfectly fine. The establishment Republicans are backing down already. They're total cowards. I've said this before. The Republicans are the cowardly lion party. That is, that they'll sit there and they'll work themselves up and roar and, oh, I'm so brave, we're going to do this and that, and then they don't do it. Because all you have to do is say, oh, you sound a little sexist, you sound a little racist, you're breaking the rule of law, you're breaking some pomp and circumstance bullshit ceremonialism within government, so you're a bad person. Oh no, don't call me bad names. Oh my God, they're like, they run the House, the Senate, and everything else, and they still stall out their own Kavanaugh as an appointee for days and days based on nothing more than years-old allegations that don't even make any fucking sense. So the Republicans, even when they're in power, they're total cowards. Trump's not. He's a Democrat. Trump fundamentally is just a sane 80s era Democrat with maybe more fiscal conservatism. That's really, he's not doing anything the Democrats haven't done anyway, but they've gone off the rails recently as a party. They've gone far, far left. They're getting further left now with the new crop of people in the House especially. It's very funny to watch. Now, but they're basically backing down because what happens is all the Democrats, all the people that don't like Trump are basically like, stand with Roberts. He's trying to destroy people's faith in the judicial branch of the government. Oh, the judicial branch is totally independent. No, the Ninth Circuit is not at all partisan. No, judges cannot possibly have political ideologies or anything. Remember when the Florida Supreme Court was the butt of every joke among Democrats? Did they have judicial independence at the time? Did they make the right decision with the Florida recount, giving the presidency to George W. during the recount process itself? What about McDonald versus Chicago? What about when the Supreme Court decided that yes, indeed, guns are an individual right? They're also not a privilege. Yes, assault weapons, so-called, are perfectly allowable. And the states can't violate the second either. You call them judicial, and the Republicans, they're 10 times worse. Because they've said this exact shit for years. And now all of a sudden they're cowering and they're saying, oh no, but we can't defend Trump for saying literally what we've been saying since before the Roberts Court even existed. What have they been saying for decades now? Judicial activism, the Ninth Circuit, the eternal boogeyman of the right wing. They've been saying this and much worse for a long time. The Democrats always said, yeah, whatever, sort of ignored it. Now all of a sudden Trump's the one saying it. So now it's a big problem. It's sort of like politicians insulting one another. They do it all the fucking time. Trump does it on Twitter more visibly. All of a sudden, it's a breach of government etiquette. Everyone knows how polite everyone in government is. They're polite, upstanding individuals. You have to have faith in them. It's sort of like when the CIA comes out and says, hey, Khashoggi was killed at the behest of Crown Prince Salman. Yeah, he probably was, but what do we know about trusting some fucking three-letter agency at its word? Is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? I'm going to make a separate video about that, about my opinions about the Saudi Arabia shit with Trump and everyone else weighing in. The Republicans deride the judiciary all the time. Judicial activism has been, back in the Bush era, it was a big thing, because you'd have these federal courts blocking some of the worst aspects of Bush's, war of terror, you could call it. Basically, he wanted to spy on the library books and listen into your phone calls, do a million other things, and the courts blocked him. Thus, latter-day Bush into the Obama era, what did they have to do? They had to invent new agencies with such high levels of classification that the normal judiciary wouldn't stand in their way anymore. They had to circumvent the Fourth Amendment by creating an unconstitutional rubber stamping process overseen partially by the legislature, which is unconstitutional, but people, they didn't know what was going on, so there's no way to challenge it, really. You got a totally opaque government, how do you issue a legal challenge? The normal judiciary that could stand in the way of the tyranny can't get involved if it doesn't know something's happening. If everything's so top secret there can't be a claimant, well, I guess you can't have a legal case now, can you? The courts can't even issue an injunction. The government ignores it and says, it's top secret. You can't do anything about it. Nope, sorry. We can't get you that information. It would be it's a risk to national security. It's under lock and key right now. Sorry, you can't read it at all to determine whether I'm full of shit or not. If Trump were actually a fascist, he'd be glowing with laughter because of what Obama and Bush have handed him as far as executive power. Meanwhile, yes, the Ninth Circuit is repeatedly attempting to block virtually any meaningful attempt to solve the border crisis right now. That is judicial activism. Now, of course, if you're on the left, you probably agree with it, but it is activism. And it happens on the right, too. Technically speaking, the overturning of the Cruikshank decision, while I agree with it, while constitutionally I agree, it was an activistic step for the courts to set aside more than a century, technically, of case law as basically open to any interpretation, as basically open to be thrown out, because it was based on something, the premise of which they determined in retrospect, oh yeah, we've been violating people's firearm rights for 130 fucking years. Sorry about that, folks, but we're wise now. Any sort of overturning of that type technically is judicial activism. But Trump can, I don't care if Trump insults John Roberts. John Roberts really fudged it on the ACA. He should have ruled it was unconstitutional. That the idea that the government can force you to pay a fee or a tax, as he labeled it, to make this decision, because you don't have the money to pay for something else, is ridiculous. It doesn't even make pragmatic economic sense. It's the only thing that was holding up the whole house of cards that was the ACA. It's basically gone anyway. It's kind of still there. I mean, no meaningful reform can be made as long as a bunch of idiots run the GOP in the Senate anyway. The Democrats are more likely to make an honest attempt to reform the ACA. The problem being their idea of reform is massive expansion, another layer of bureaucracy hoping to solve the problem. The Republicans, by the way, will probably back down and give them that too, because they're fucking cowards. They don't know how to fight. Trump speculated that years ago. He's like, well, the Republicans don't know how to win. I will teach them, if I remember correctly. Yeah, essentially that is definitely a problem. That's about all. Peace out.